say it's a blockchain, and yeah, you try to persuade your investors, but they say, yo, do you have something to show me? Well, not really, so you go back to the office, and your manager is not like super pleased about it, and so you have to fix it. So you go for a coffee, maybe a cigarette, and start digging into the topic, making a prototype. So maybe let's go to designers first, but it will take a long time probably, and it will not be a final as never. So you think you'll start with a tech proof and then go to the designers, since the next event is in 3 days. So next part, tech overview. Okay, so you have some technological options here. Since you're a web developer, you probably won't choose React Native or native scripts, since they have some special syntax to it to compile to mobile application. The Flutter is pretty cool. It uses Dart though. It's a Google supported language, and it's really similar to TypeScript, but well, you have to have some learning curve to jump into it, so maybe not. The Wix, it's a mobile framework from Alibaba, worth checking out, but the most of the documentation is in Chinese. If you know Chinese, then go ahead. But since we're, let's say, web developers as me, I'll go with an Ionic. Since there's no learning curve, it's pretty fast to bootstrap the project and follow along. So yeah, why hybrid? Because it's not native, it's hybrid. It uses WebView under the hood. So Ionic is super quick to get along with. Web devs are easily adopts the tech, and it's cheap because you don't have to hire some Kotlin or Swift developers, and it will run on both Android and iOS and web as well. But let's stick to the mobile. It has a great community and it's pretty straightforward documentation, so you can pretty much after getting started be fluent with it, let's say. Some, as my CTO says, that's the anti-pattern, but let's say you can start with it. The version 4 will be framework agnostic, so you can write, let's say, components with React, Vue, or Angular. The version 3 I'll be showing you will be in Angular. Okay, next. Okay, so that covers the front-end part, but what about the blockchain stuff? In browser we have the MetaMask or Mist that handles the wallet and let's say signing for us. But on mobile, on let's say Angular or Ionic, whatever, you don't have the wallet. You don't have authorization of the user, let's say. So after quick Googling, we came up with Ethereum Light Wallet library and Hook Web3 provider, both by Consensus company. You can go check it out. It's pretty old libraries, but that's what I'll be using. Yeah, the project structure and setup. So there should be a video. So basically you can leverage the Ionic CLI to quickly just Ionic start. It bootstraps your application. Then you generate some views like login page and list. And then you generate some providers, services, and basic setup will look like on the right hand side. So the app component, that's the entry point of our application, simply sets the login page as the entry point for now, and we wait for Cordova to bootstrap and load into our application. The next part is the login page. The login component will have a seed and password. We assume here that our user has already, let's say, account created with MetaMask or other tool, and will import that account into our application using the seed words. and he can use whatever password he wants to hash or encrypt the private key. And the unlocking method will simply navigate to our page. Yeah. So this is on the left is our login HTML file that uses the Ionic components. You can find those components in the documentation. The usage of these are pretty straightforward. You just use their tags, and they're pre-styled, so your application wouldn't look too bad just for a prototype. Basically, here we have a seed input and password input that we'll be using in our controller. Yeah, this is the screenshot from the documentation. You can already in real time see the preview for iOS, Android, and Windows platforms on the right-hand side. We have fields and explanations to it, so it's really easy to use. So after logging, we have a list page, and the list page will have some methods updating licenses, because we're building the application that will have a list of licenses and a store that you can buy from. And yeah, on the left-hand side, there are some methods that I'll talk in a while, in next slides. So we'll have a balance that will be displayed to user, currently logged in user, items that users owns, the indicator if the transaction is pending, so we can handle it on the front end, and some switching bar for it. Okay, so this is the list of items that user owns. On the left-hand side, there are some Ionic components that we're using. We implement as well some pull to refresh, which ships with Ionic straight away from, let's say, bootstrapping the app. And yeah, that's it. That's the store. So you have sliding item to buy it, and this little nice animated indicator that the transaction is pending, and after it succeeds or not, there will be some action on the front end as well. Yeah, that was the project structure, and now the integration with the chain. Okay, so the first thing, we'll need that wallet thing. So wallet provider, or wallet service, Ionic calls the Angular services providers because they wanted it this way. Anyway, so we got a wallet provider that we generated earlier with a CLI, and we have two methods. The first one will be the creating the vault, which takes the password that user chooses, and seed phrase that is generated by, let's say, MetaMask. HDPath is, those two last parameters are optional, of course. You can use other sources to import your accounts. HDPath here is hard-coded. This is specifically for MetaMask. And those methods are using callbacks, so let's wrap it with promises. So on the front-end part, we'll be using the usage will be much more straightforward. So we're creating the vault, which will have a key store. I mean, this will return the key store, and then we can generate a private key from that key store. Under the generate new addresses, you can as well implement your method to called password provider, and by default it's just the alert that prompts user to type the password whenever the transaction is started. When you initiate the transaction, the pop-up with alert will ask you for the question that you're using to your vault. But you can implement your own password provider function that will, let's say, pop up some nice little model that will display the prompt. Okay, so now you have to update the app component. This is the the entry part of our application. So we will do some reiterating here to not ask the user every single time he starts the application for creating the vault. We'll save it, let's say, in a local storage, but probably you would like to use some secure storage, not just local storage. And if the key is found, then we'll initiate the provider for Web3 library. Otherwise, we'll stay on the login page. Okay, Web3 provider, this is our other service. We'll have the two public fields here, the balance and the address, so we can easily, as a subject, so we can easily subscribe it to the view and receive the latest data from services. And we'll have the field Web3, which is just the Web3.js library. We'll have as well the address pipe, which will be the utility for our addresses to have a prefix, which is nothing special. And okay, after that we can update our providers with more methods. The init provider, after creating the vault on the login page, we're initializing the provider. So if the local storage saves stuff as a string, so we have to deserialize the key store if it's in a local storage. If not, then we're passing it straight forward to the hooked Web3 provider. The side note on the hooked Web3 provider on the top is that you can, as the documentation says, you can pass any provider that implements two functions, has address and signed transaction. Since the Ethereum Light Wallet, let's say, has those functions, we can use that provider as well. And yep, the provider will be passed as an argument to Web3 object to bootstrap the provider for our node. Here, as the host, I have a chain running on my colleague's computer on our local network, and he was good enough to make me some demo contract we'll be using next. Yeah, after successfully initializing the provider, we're updating user data, so we're gathering his balance, and we're broadcasting it through the subject to our views. So the contract provider, the contract provider. So we'll be, we might have multiple contracts in our application. So here, there's this convenient thing to do, like makes a getter per feature and create the new instance of per feature. As the features needs the Web3 itself, we're passing it as argument in a constructor here. So the example contract will look like this, and we'll have a couple of fields here. The transaction, the pending transaction indicator, the contract address, and the API. The last two probably would like to take from some config. So when your application bootstraps, you probably want some config to come in with the latest data on your contract and API, and fetch it and pass it to this class. And in the constructor, we're initiating the contract instance that we'll be using with API and contract address. Later, we got two methods on our contact that will list all of our assets or licenses, and some action method like buy item, which will verify the user and assign the license to the account. And some utility function as like is pending, so we'll be tracking if the transaction is pending or not. Get items is a simple getter on the contract, so we don't have any callback on that. We just provide the address and get the list of IDs. The buy item method will be more interesting since we'll have to pass some parameters. So on the view we got this sliding item and buy button, and after that we'll use this method to buy stuff. So we got this contract instance. We pass the ID, the address, who is a buyer, the gas. Probably you want to implement the gas variations when you want to transaction be processed faster. If the contract supports that, you can make some select drop-down menu for user to choose if he wants to pay more for a transaction to be processed faster or not, and the value, which is the price here. And this method returns a callback with error or a success that we're wrapping in a promise for easier handling in a controller for the view. When the contract succeeds, I mean when the initial request succeeds, then the pending indicator sets its value to true, and we can react to that through the subscribed subject on the view, and show this animated indicator that the transaction is in progress. And when we receive event from contract, event was also implemented in a contract, it's called print. We can watch for it, and it's just underneath, it's just the puller. It just asks the contract every, I think, like 100 milliseconds, and it checks for next status. When it receives the next status, which is different than before, then you have error or response message to your listener. So this should be the demo, but videos doesn't work in this presentation. So yeah, and then you go to the conference. Then you go to the conference with this working prototype, and you finally can get the money for the project. Hopefully. Okay, yeah, that's all.
Yeah, what about the waiting about the confirmation blocks? Because, yeah, you, for example, buy the item, your transaction is in the ledger, but, well, we can have the split of the chain there because of the same timing on the different part of the network.
Okay, I think the question was
about the waiting for the number of confirmations in the block.
Yeah, so that probably is solved by the contract. I think the contract says how many those confirmation has to be, and if there is sufficient number, then it sends the event. But maybe I'm wrong. Paweł? It depends.
No.
So I cannot answer you to that question.
I got a question about running the local instance of the chain. Is
Mhm.
it difficult to achieve?
The instance was run by Martin as well.
It's pretty easy. It's pretty easy.
But he says it's
not
pretty
so
easy.
difficult. At least for me. To be honest, it's pretty easy.
Any other questions?
Alright.
Okay, thank you. No problem. Why TypeScript? It's the most needed language in this year. Have you seen Stack Overflow tools? Okay, thank you.